It feels like it is time to talk about the past year, about our future, to reconnect and re-envision our destinations, to celebrate each other and our resiliency. Because we're still here. We can be the authors of the way forward. We can increase our impact on sustainability, on innovation and collaboration, on social responsibility. It is time to come together again and listen, to hear each other out, to share our perspectives, to have a good talk. This is how inspiration happens and ideas are born, how plans come into focus. And together we realize the power of the tourism industry. That we can positively impact our communities, all of Canada, and who knows, maybe even the world. Words become action, action becomes change. Making an impact starts now. We cannot rely on others to be our voice. No one else can do this for us. Please join the conversation. Impact Sustainability Travel and Tourism 2021.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know some people are still logging in. Bonjour à tous et tout. We're just getting ready to go here for our Impact Sustainability Travel and Tourism Conference virtual summit. It's just approaching 8:30 now, so we'll ask all the panelists to get ready to go. And I know people are still logging in. We've had an overwhelming response to this 90-minute session, and we're excited to share what we hope is very timely and relevant content with everyone this morning. So we'll let everyone continue to log in, and we'll get going very shortly. And I'd like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Paul Nursey, and I'm the CEO here at Destination Greater Victoria, but one of four co-founders with our impact partners. So we'll get headed into the program here momentarily. As we get started, I would like to quickly remind everyone of our expected outcomes for today. We want to make sure that our attendees understand the potential paths to recovery and maybe some key milestones or things that we want to achieve along the way. We have a better understanding of how recovery may look, although we know that success is not a straight line, some of the key markets and opportunities. Talk a little bit about social traveler responsibility and expectations of both practitioners, destinations, and even travelers and industry themselves. And then a discussion about how Canada can continue to position itself globally as an emerging leader in sustainability, knowing that there are other destinations that are doing a great job and that this is really a journey. I'd like to very quickly remind everyone of Slido. I see that Slido is already very active. And also to remind everyone that this session will be shared. It's being recorded and will be shared. And we're going to capture the questions and share those out as well. And to be respectful of everyone's time, we are going to limit it to 90 minutes today. We promised a focus session, and everyone does have time commitments, including all the panelists. So we're going to keep it focused to 90 minutes. So there's going to be several areas to go through in terms of the agenda. In a moment, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Kaylee to go through some housekeeping, and then we'll launch into the program. But what I'd really like to do now is launch into our territorial acknowledgement. This is very important for all of us, and vitally important for us at Destination Greater Victoria to recognize that we are broadcasting to you, and we work every day and live on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people. In particular, we have the Songhees and Esquimalt nations right close to downtown Victoria, but there are other nations in the Greater Victoria area. We're grateful to be able to partner with them and particularly explore Songhees as they develop tourism operations. So again, we're grateful to acknowledge the territories that we're broadcasting from. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Kaylee Anderson, who is the program director for Impact and has been for several years, who's going to walk us through a bit of housekeeping.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul. I'd also just like to throw out a quick thank you to our sponsors, Tourism Vancouver Island, Fortis BC, and MMGY Global for their support for this event today. To kick us off, I'd like to share with those of you who are new to Impact, some of our dreams, beliefs, and character, and how we tend to approach our content and our discussions. For those of you who have attended Impact in the past, this will be a lovely reminder. Our dream is to create a legacy for regenerative tourism in Canada. And we believe that to do this, we need to have some tough conversations. It's been a rough year, and this has never been more true this year than in previous years. We are also not afraid to be vulnerable. These are, like I said, tough times, and we want to make sure that we are talking about the things that are most important to everyone here today. And to do that, we need to have safe places to have these candid discussions. So we hope that you will join us in opening up and creating this welcoming environment for these discussions to happen, and that we can be respectful of each other and our opinions. And we really try to engage people from all value sets and perspectives when we are creating the content. And we've seen some amazing attendees shouting out where they're joining us from all across Canada. I saw some from the United States and even from Russia. So really excited to welcome you all today. Some of the words that we like to use to describe ourselves are courageous, candid, resilient. Again, I think that might be the most important word for this year. We're collaborative. We like to work together to find solutions. We support each other. And we are industrious. Again, something that's going to be so important for this year. There's only two pieces of housekeeping for us today, really. This idea of how we hope to embrace the discussion today, and then where we are going to be having this discussion. If you haven't joined Slido already, please open up a second browser, pull out your phone, find a way to get onto Slido. It is where we will be having our main discussion. We will be using it to poll the attendees for, we've got some questions that we want to be asking you. And it's where you'll be able to pose questions to the panelists for the Q&A at the end of the panel. If you are having any issues at all with your tech, or you need support for IT, use the Zoom chat. We've got some great support from MMGY Global, and they will be there to support you. So just a quick sneak peek at what we're looking at from Slido. We should have in a moment our very first question up for you. And you'll see that your answers can start being added right away. So we want to know from you, what is the most important issue facing the Canadian tourism industry at this time? Or yeah, so sorry, what is the most important issue facing the Canadian tourism industry post-COVID? So you can see that there are already some answers that are populating in here. Some of them are larger. Those are the ones that have been repeated. So if you see an answer in there that you think is really important, type that one in again. We'll understand then that it is a very important issue. Feel free to add in your comments here as we go through the next welcome and reality check. We will be circling back to this, the answers to this question later on in the session. And I'm just so excited to see how quickly this is filling up. So I am going to flip it back to Paul here. He's going to take us through a quick run through of the agenda, as well as an introduction to our sponsors. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you for that great housekeeping update. We have three main sponsors for the event today. When we have the full Impact Conference every January, we have dozens and dozens of sponsors, but we wanted to make sure that this was a tighter group for a tighter event. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Tourism Vancouver Island, our regional destination marketing organization here on Vancouver Island. Destination Greater Victoria and Tourism Vancouver Island have developed a very, very deep partnership, likely unique amongst large city DMOs and regional DMOs, which has really been built on trust and collaboration. So we're just delighted to have Tourism Vancouver Island working with us again today. Our next, all of our sponsors are vital, but we'll go to our next sponsor. FortisBC is a natural gas and energy provider in British Columbia and other parts of North America. And they have a very unique action plan, their 30 by 30 plan. They offer practical solutions for hotels, restaurants, and others around energy conservation and reducing climate or emissions related targets. They're very friendly to work with. They work with many of our hotels in Victoria, and we're just delighted to have them sponsoring this event again today. And last but not least, MMGY Global, who has recently become our agency of record at Destination Greater Victoria, but for the last number of years has been amongst the lead sponsors, offering considerable contributions, and has really handled all the tech and the production capabilities for this event. So we're absolutely delighted to have MMGY Global as an incredible partner again this session. So thank you to all three sponsors, and I think it's time to dive into the program. So the first thing we really want to get into is an introduction. And we have two strategic partners at Impact. Starting from the very outset, we have two big partners in terms of Indigenous Tourism Canada, and we'll hear from Keith Henry in a moment, but also TTRA Canada, the Canada chapter of TTRA. These two partners provide thought leadership, they keep us honest, great content. And with that, I'd like to throw it over to Marianne Joppe, who many of you will remember from our previous conferences as a real leader, and also from the University of Guelph, and just an important mentor to many of us in the Canadian tourism industry. So Marianne would like to give us a special welcome.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very kind words. I would like to welcome everybody, both old and new friends to Impact, to today's check-in and panel discussion. At the conclusion of last year's conference, when we were energized by progress on building a regenerative, equitable, and sustainable visitor economy, we had no idea what a roller coaster year awaited our industry. Between lockdowns, border closures, travel bubbles, and restrictions of all kinds, travel and tourism was hit faster and harder than any other sector of the economy. Businesses have been through at least 3, if not more, cycles of closures and partial openings as COVID-19 case numbers fluctuate and variants spread. And just when we thought we might be through the worst of it, because at long last vaccines are being administered, we're told that in the race against the virus, we may not be winning. And yet planning for the summer season must start now, and hiring and onboarding taking place in the next 4 to 6 weeks. This uncertainty has forced quite a number of skilled workers in the industry to search for job opportunities elsewhere, which will provide a real challenge for operators when they are allowed to reopen. And make no mistake, demand for travel and tourism will be back as people are anxious to visit with friends and family, but also to explore the world that many have discovered in rapidly increasing numbers in the last few decades. Long neglected by most governments as a sector that can not only enrich people's lives, but also provide meaningful economic, social, and environmental stimuli for local communities, if properly planned. The silver lining of this pandemic is that there isn't a politician anywhere that has not finally grasped this sector's importance and interconnectedness with every industry in the economy. But the extended pause in travel has also given people a chance to reevaluate its potential as a regenerative force. However, in rebuilding better, we must also ensure the sector's greater resilience, because whether it is COVID staying with us for years to come or another pandemic that will wreak havoc, as the experts tell us to expect, we are told we must embrace disruption. This is a lot harder than it sounds, as it requires great nimbleness and flexibility on the part of operators, neither trait one that has been much in view. Consider that it's taken airlines the better part of a year to agree to reimburse travelers for flight cancellations that were not within their control. Winning back their trust will require more than just assurances around health and safety measures, as the rules regarding travel can change at a moment's notice for businesses and consumers alike. Since we have a bit more control when traveling within Canada, this may be the opportunity to entice Canadians to explore this country beyond their provincial borders. We have an amazing and incredibly diverse country, of which most Canadians have seen only a small part. This may be their chance to discover it from coast to coast to coast. listen to the stories of the land and its people, and learn to appreciate the different viewpoints that make this country the envy of much of the world. Hopefully, people, both as traveling guests and as resident hosts, will continue to follow the advice of our health experts, that everyone can enjoy and profit from a good summer season. And then in January 2022, we can all meet again in person in Victoria for the 5th Impact Conference, share the lessons learned, and leave the conference with even more ideas of how to meet worldwide demand for our amazing experiences in a sustainable manner. And because Victoria is such a beautiful city, you may even want to come back and participate in the international conference of our research association in June of 2022. Back to you, Paul.
Wow, thank you, Marian. You never fail to inspire us. What an incredible opening and welcoming remarks. Thank you so much. And we look forward to January and June of 2022. With that, I'm going to throw it right over to Marsha Walden, who is well-known and as a very strategic and incredibly smart leader, and is the CEO of our national tourism organization, Destination Canada. This is a reality check, and we have a 10-minute presentation with a few slides. So Marsha, without further ado, over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. It's very nice to be joining you today, and I'm delighted to be joining you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm just having a moment here while I try to get my presentation put together. There we go. Je suis heureuse d'être ici aujourd'hui et j'apprécie l'occasion qui m'est donnée de partager avec vous quelques mises à jour importantes. Prior to COVID, the world was experiencing sustained global growth, as we know in tourism, but perhaps in an unsustainable economic model. Canada's visitor economy was certainly growing, but we saw challenges emerging here at home and certainly problems becoming much more evident in other countries around the world. We saw an uneven distribution of benefits, difficulty accessing labor and in some cases capital, questions becoming more and more evident around the environmental sustainability of our industry, and social license among residents and local governments being really a critical question for many parts of the world. And finally, we saw an insufficient, I would say, integration of strategy from a development perspective, from a commercial perspective, and from a commercial market perspective, and from a government perspective. And while transformational travel was a very hot topic, we did see more and more growing demand for product that truly aligned with travelers' values. So lots of things were happening. And then, of course, came the pandemic. So as we look ahead, we know tourism is in pretty rough seas. I don't think the seas have ever been this challenging. And we're all in very different boats. There are thousands of different individual businesses that I would say are experiencing this pandemic in very different ways. So how do we navigate a way forward, one that helps us survive today, but also that allows us to realize the full potential that we have as an industry of the future, part of the new economy that Canada strives to develop. So to help set the stage for our panel discussion today, I'm going to briefly talk on three broad goals that really take us across three time horizons. First, we have to survive. This pandemic has devastated many parts of our industry, and the related restrictions that keep evolving, as Marian referenced, are making it extremely challenging just to get through this period of survival. But later this year, we need an opportunity to revive ourselves, to start driving market revenue and create a sense of optimism for the future and confidence among travelers. And finally, looking a little farther ahead, we need to rebuild an industry that we believe can thrive in the new world, that increases the vitality of our industry that recognizes that delivering net benefits to communities is important and critical to the long-term resilience of our industry and the businesses in it. So let's just begin by doing a bit of a check-in on the condition of our sector, which is dire to say the least. The combined impacts of our global pandemic, frankly, have wiped out 35 years of growth. And you're going to hear Keith speak a little more about the specific impacts of that in the Indigenous sector. Worse than all previous shocks combined, whether we're talking SARS, 9/11, the global economic crisis, this pandemic outdoes them all. And along with most forecasters, Destination Canada does anticipate a full recovery is going to take years, likely to 2025. So that's a tough row to hoe. And we know that many tourism businesses either didn't even open in 2020, some have gone out of business entirely, and many have just limped along on the various lowest of revenues, trying to keep their head above the water. And as we've heard many times, and Marion also referenced, tourism was hit first, hit hardest, and will be the last to recover. And overall, the impact to our industry has been much worse than any other sector. And if there is any silver lining in this, certainly our politicians and our public know that tourism has a big impact on their lives in communities everywhere in our country. And of course, tourism unemployment reflects that kind of devastation. It's double the rest of the economy in terms of unemployment. And in particular, we know that women, youth, new Canadians, and Indigenous workers have been especially hit hard. So the summer of 2021 could not be more critical. Without a fighting chance to drive revenue, we anticipate that much of our supply chain will be severely damaged or broken, which makes recovery even more difficult for those left standing. Importantly, we do know that Canadians appreciate the value of tourism to their communities and to our economy. And governments at every level have been providing relief at a scale and speed that has never been seen before in times of peace. I know there are lots of parts of our economy that are still suffering, but government's response has been swift. The leading indicators of demand are pointing in a positive direction overall. Confidence is growing, and that carries the prospect of a revival of our market-driven revenues, which is critical to making it through 2021. No doubt there will be more bumps in the road to recovery, and we're seeing some of those right now as provinces reverse gear and have to retrench again to try to battle this pandemic. But hopefully that will be our last major retrenchment. Market openings are expected to evolve in the same way they did in 2020, beginning very close to home and spreading out from there. Of Canadians say they plan to travel when restrictions are relaxed. So the pent-up demand is there. It's important and very critical, though, that capturing a portion of those travelers who would otherwise spend their money outside of our country, spend it here in Canada, is part of the solution that can have a huge positive impact on how we fare coming out of this. In fact, we expect that just by having Canadians spend their money here this year, it would speed recovery to 2019 levels by a full year. In the short term, Destination Canada's marketing plans are designed to channel demand to destinations across Canada, and particularly to the hardest hit urban centers that form the gateways for tourism right across our country. Of course, our messaging has to align with the ever-evolving changes in health regulations and the other restrictions that we're facing. So we have a multi-phased approach, I'm sure, like many of you. And later this month and into the summer, we'll be urging Canadians to plan and book their Canadian vacations, many of whom have already done so, and helping to rebuild confidence in travel through peer-to-peer advocacy. For so many months now, we've been helping Canadians to better understand the value of tourism in their communities and how tourism really contributes to their quality of life as a Canadian. So you may have seen the Heartbeat of Canada social posts that I'm hoping you're reposting that showcase tourism workers from right across the country and help to explain the many parts of our day-to-day life that tourism touches. I also urge you to have a look at the Revisiting Tourism report, which we released just about 2 weeks ago to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic. And that information package distributed through Canadian Press received over 1,500 media pickups nationwide and gave us a real opportunity to talk about how tourism contributes to our quality of life and why Canadians should travel in Canada this year. In 2021, Destination Canada will be making a very large investment in tourism, domestic tourism marketing, which is unusual for us. And that helps to restore confidence in travel. We'll focus on interprovincial travel and help to support those key urban centers that need to get back on their feet and once again become the gateways to our country. We'll be working with our provinces, territories, cities, Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada to ensure that we have an integrated program that can help support recovery. And you can expect to hear more and more on that later this month. Looking internationally, we've worked with our North Star partners to really revamp our strategy and define new ways to collaborate, but also to better compete for travelers in what we know will be a very ferocious global landscape that we'll be re-entering. And hopefully we'll be re-entering in the same kind of time frame that many of our competitors are. We've continued to cultivate and protect those valuable overseas trade and media relationships throughout this pandemic, both for leisure travel and business events. It was important to keep the lights on all around the world as we went through this process. And our largest investments will be into the US, which of course is our #1 international market for Canada as a whole, and about 10 times larger than any other international source market. But what will it take for the visitor economy across Canada to really thrive in the long term? We believe it begins with a new North Star toward why we really do business in the first place. At Destination Canada, our aspiration is to enhance the quality of life of Canadians and enrich the lives of our visitors. And together with industry, we enable Canadian culture to thrive and place-based regenerative economies to emerge through travel and hospitality that is done exceptionally well. But getting there begins with having a new way of thinking, a much more holistic way of thinking, understanding that the visitor economy is a complex and continuously adapting living system, perhaps one of the most complex industries of all. And that's equally true whether one is working at the level of a neighborhood, a mega cluster, the entire country, or even beyond. We also need to be guided by regenerative principles that are drawn from leading thinkers across the world, our own Indigenous peoples and their wisdom, and other destinations around the world that have embarked on this journey. And finally, elevating the role of local communities. For any of you who have read the third pillar, as it's referred to by Dr. Rajan, we need to rebalance the relationship that communities have with governments and markets that have been the focus and priorities, those latter two, for most of the industrial age. And ultimately, all of this is about cultivating fertile conditions in which destinations can thrive. And we're fortunate that there is a growing body of work from which to draw insights, some of which are referenced here. And we can look to other destinations, not so many yet, but there are some around the world, as well as a handful of Canadian business leaders for inspiration. I think in tourism, we really have the opportunity to remake ourselves for the new post-COVID world. And our new corporate strategy, I think, does that. We'll be using a new yardstick for Canada's tourism industry, one that measures whether tourism is creating net benefits for our country. And I will tell you, that is not easy. That is defining that new yardstick is a huge challenge unto itself. But as we rebuild our industry, we'll be focused on these 4 pillars of our strategy that will enable us to compete more effectively and win. But not just win generally, win the customers we want. And building on those existing strengths that we have in marketing and research, we'll be carving out a new strategic role for in destination development. We'll be working very collaboratively with other organizations in the public space, private, and not-for-profit sectors to elevate Canada's competitiveness as a tourism destination. And as I said, to cultivate those fertile conditions for destinations to thrive. In other words, to ensure that tourism is giving more than it is taking. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I look forward to chatting with my fellow panelists. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Marcia. That was a wonderful presentation and provides a top-line overview of where our country's headed, which is clearly in the right direction. I'd now like to quickly introduce Katie Briscoe, President of MMGY Global, who will give us some more global research-based insights. We are running just a few minutes behind, but we want to make time for Katie to share these insights because they are really powerful, and we can make the time up on our panel discussion. So Katie, we'll throw it over to you to share MMGY's strength and consumer research insights.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. It's truly a privilege to be here today with you to follow up Marcia, who I think set the stage really beautifully about the reality and the road that we have ahead, and then to be joined by Keith. It's just really a privilege. And then those that attend to Impact, this is, I believe, my 3rd. And those that choose to attend Impact tend to be the most progressive minds in our industry. So it really does achieve the goals that Kaylee set out before. I wanted to just take a few minutes and I'll try and move through this quickly because I do want to set up some time for Q&A. But just yesterday, our MMGY Travel Intelligence team actually released its latest data, which is continuing to give us insight into traveler perspective in a post-pandemic world. We're in uncharted territory, as Marcia said, and as a marketing team at MMGY that works exclusively in the global travel industry, I do want to recognize the unique challenges in recovery as Canada continues to face some of the strictest travel restrictions in the international community. And we're all looking straight towards the summer travel season. So there are unique challenges, but there's also unique opportunity. I definitely come today from a place of both optimism and opportunity for the Canadian travel and tourism industry, both in domestic travel and also international inbound. Marcia said it exactly how we would say it, is that we really think about recovery from the inside out, starting at home with local and domestic travel, and then really starting to open up the full travel economy and welcoming international inbound. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things today. The first is impending demand, which is largely being driven by the leisure sector, and how we can really lean into building the industry back better and leveraging this unique brand position really rooted in a future of regenerative travel. And that's, there's still work to be done to realize this dream, as Marcia said, but really within this adversity sits opportunity to really own this unique market position. So let's talk about travel demand first. It's higher than you realize. 81% of people are placing more importance on taking vacation days in 2021. We've all gone through the shared human experience where we've been really stuck someplace. And so the ability to have the freedom to go where we like is appealing to the masses. Because the US market is incredibly important for many Canadian destinations, savings are at a 10-year high in the US. We're sitting at $10 trillion in savings, and travel is seen as the second largest priority for American discretionary spending, second only to home improvement, for those of you that are curious what's above travel. So people have the money, people have the time and the inclination to travel. Consumers are eager. And Christy, if you wouldn't mind popping up the intent slide, just so that I can share this with the group. Consumers are eager and they're going to spend more time planning for travel. This actually comes from TripAdvisor data, but you can actually see here that people expect to spend more time planning and selecting a destination. Almost 3/4 said that as a result of the pandemic, they're going to spend more time selecting a destination. They're going to spend 71% more time selecting an accommodation, and then also selecting things to do in attractions. So people are anxious to start planning travel in the process of travel, which is why messaging is so critically important as we reopen the travel economy. Thanks, Christy. In short, we can absolutely expect for the demand to be there. And I know today in the panel discussion, we're going to get into supply side considerations, because the travel industry most certainly is not a switch you flip on and flip off with demand. We have to rebuild, and that requires a tremendous amount of focus and tourism management. So let's step into stepping away from demand. Let's talk about what's different about travelers today, and particularly to Marcia's point, the travelers that we want to invite into Canadian destinations. To be sure, this travel economy is about quality, not quantity, and which is a truly enormous opportunity given the mindset of consumers today coming out of a pandemic. We knew travelers' values were changing prior to this experience, but in our latest round of research, we're seeing an even clearer delineation between age cohorts about their concerns about environmental impact than ever before. So 61% of active millennial leisure travelers actually indicated that a travel service provider's focus on sustainability and environmental considerations impacts their travel decision makings. So 61% of active millennial leisure travelers say that when I see that you're doing these things, it makes me want to stay with you. It makes me want to purchase product from you. This is compared to only 19% of boomers who said the same thing. And we know, and we've talked about this over and over again, that it's not just about doing good, it's about growing business and prosperity. And that is part of attracting what are considered high value travelers, those that are rooted in sustainability minded practices. So 67% will spend at least 5% more for low impact travel providers, and about 31% will spend at least 3 days longer in the destination. And this data actually comes from Booking.com and Mandala Research. We've also seen that the perception of personal responsibility has also changed substantially throughout the pandemic. And Christy, if you wouldn't mind popping up that second slide. 83% of active leisure travelers are willing to change travel behavior to reduce the impact on the environment, with younger travelers stepping forward and saying they're willing to make the extra effort. They're also more willing to book with environmentally friendly companies, avoid auto transportation, and when possible, purchase carbon offsets. Boomers and Gen Xers are more willing to visit destinations in the off season. I have to say that they were more inclined to do this anyways because of the freedom of being able to travel at shoulder seasons of the year, and also just the flexibility from a scheduling standpoint. They were more likely to do this prior to us aligning it with environmental responsibility. But again, that's a motivator that we have to understand. 6 in 10 active leisure travelers are willing to pay more to patronize travel services that are demonstrating these environmental responsibilities. As I said before, it continues to skew higher with younger generations. But as you might expect, what millennials say they'll spend their money on and what they actually spend their money on tend to be two different things. Marcia and I were actually chatting about that a couple of days ago in preparation for today's session, which is why we can't take our eyes off older age cohorts with more discretionary spending ability by formulating some really robust messaging strategies to connect with them in the place they're at from a consumer mindset. We have to recognize motivations, and Christy, you can take that slide down, thanks so much. We have to recognize motivations and the behaviors of our target audiences across the spectrum of sustainability. I know that there are some feelings about tourism and what that looks like coming back after the pandemic, but travel is the second largest industry in the world. It's a $10 trillion industry, second only to agriculture. And the reality, like Marcia outlined, again, so beautifully, is that we can build a travel economy that can benefit everyone. And that is by building back better and taking advantage of the opportunities of these cracks that have shown themselves so distinctly in the course of the pandemic, for us to do the right thing and not to fall back into old habits for short-term gains, but to think about the ability to build back better for really long-term prosperity. Thanks, Paul, back to you.
Katie, thank you for sharing those insights. I think they complement what Marcia had to say, and a great deal, and it's exactly what we're seeing from our short haul research here in Victoria, where we have a few primary markets. I'd now like to turn to Keith Henry, the CEO of Indigenous Tourism Canada, and a greatly respected leader in the Canadian travel landscape. Keith, before we jump into your Indigenous tourism update, and I'll just ask you to run through all of your content all at once for the sake of time, you've also done some recent research and have some insights to share. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Did you want me just to speak to that, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead. The floor is now yours. Entirely, just go with it.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully my connection it seems to be having some lag issues, but hopefully it's coming out okay. I think more than anything, I just want to let delegates, or I guess folks attending today, we've done ongoing continued research with Indigenous tourism, and we know there's a marketing opportunity. We know there's a demand side, but we need to have an honest conversation about this. You know, I've been, in many platforms talking about the impacts to our sector. And I think in a lot of ways, Indigenous tourism embodies a lot of the characteristics that we're hearing about the traveler trends, particularly what Katie shared with us as well. The problem we're going to have is that there really needs to be a reality check about, can we provide the service? Can Indigenous tourism businesses survive the pandemic enough and the impacts of COVID-19 to our industry, so we can be a part of packaging? We can provide visitors Indigenous destination options. We can be part of all the receptive tour operators as they rebuild and their supply chains. And that's a big challenge for us. And the research we have continues to show that it's been quite devastating to our sector, as it has to many within the tourism industry in Canada. Well, but what's not talked about, and I just want to raise that, Indigenous tourism has been hit, according to our research, even harder than the mainstream tourism sector, although I don't want to diminish the fact that all of the tourism industry has been hit hard. So we've worked with the Conference Board of Canada. We released research in the fall of 2020. And after the first wave, we had assessed, and it was the largest Indigenous tourism industry review. We had just about 600 businesses, Indigenous tourism businesses, take part of the survey of our 1,800. So a really good subset, quite broad geographically, whether it was north, south, east, west. And the fact was that we saw 66% decline in direct GDP. So, you know, pre-COVID, Indigenous tourism was in great demand. We've seen a number of hundreds of startup businesses with communities and entrepreneurs. And the fact is we lost 66% GDP. You know, the sector is very difficult, whether you're a hotel or a cultural center, outdoor adventure, Indigenous culinary, whatever the area of tourism you're in, it's pretty tough to survive those kind of reality checks for financial impacts. So we saw that we estimated that in the fall that we would lose, after the first wave, about 714 businesses with our research. The second wave hit, you know, in terms of the dealing with the supply side of it, or helping stabilize our sector. We've missed the mark completely in terms of what I believe is required for relief programs to save Indigenous tourism. And we predicted another 500 or so businesses could be part of the impacts of that. So here we are today, we're on the verge of the third wave in 2020 in front of us. So, you know, it's a really, I don't want to be negative about it, but the fact remains that these are metrics that can't ignore if we're going to talk and have a real conversation about how we're going to rebuild Indigenous tourism across this country. So, you know, if we go from 1,800 businesses, and if you're following the math, we'll be down to 500-600 businesses at best. We hope we're wrong. We hope a lot of businesses have hibernated, but we are actively engaged with our businesses in every part of the country. So the research shows that, and I think more than anything, we need to continue to work as a country, as an industry, to how to stabilize the entire sector so that we know pent-up demand will be there. But the fact remains, if we don't have the businesses to provide the service, that's going to be a significant impact.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Keith. Keith, thank you for that update. That was very, very, very helpful and good perspective. We're now going to slide down into our section 2, which is kind of our final section. And we do have just over 40 minutes left for a bit of a robust discussion. We'll head into a panel discussion, and again, we'll encourage people to use Slido. But I have been getting briefed from some of our colleagues behind the scenes on some of the themes that have been building. The themes, not surprisingly, that have been very popular have been building back better with social license, very important theme developing. Also about community support, making sure we have community support, and that's a big broad topic, but maybe in our panel we can get a bit more granular on that. And also the other piece around, which is a bit surprising because we've all been very focused on domestic markets, there has been quite a bit of focus on international markets as well too. So with all of this, we're going to head into section 2, which is about hopes and fears, and more of a panel style discussion. So with that, we'll arrange the screen accordingly. But I've been asked to share as the moderator my hopes and fears to kick it off, and I'll keep my remarks short. But I think in terms of the hopes category, I'm really hoping that the industry writ large has used this time to use this downtime well. It has been forced downtime, and we've been trying to, in our shop, even with reduced capacity, to retool, re-examine everything. Our organization and our conference center have both achieved carbon neutral status. We've reviewed how we're doing our marketing, our sales, how we engage with our community, and we stood up our sustainability committee, and some of them are on the line today. So we're very focused on that. And of course, my fear is that this is more of a marketer's perspective, because that's what we are, but it affects everyone, is we kind of miss that inflection point. I'm very concerned, and it's a little bit out of our control because so much is to do with health orders and government restrictions. As Katie mentioned, there is so much recovery underway right now. There's so much pent-up demand that if Canada is one of the last economies in the, let's call it the Western or the OECD world to reopen, that tour operators and cruise lines and others, even if you don't like cruise lines, some of you on the line, just redraw their distribution maps around Canada, because there's more certainty in other countries, and that's beyond the control of anyone on this call, including Destination Canada, because these are government orders. But it is a fear of mine, and we had a bit of a scare in the last couple of weeks around the cruise business here on the West Coast, that may be under threat, and we're losing tour series into 2023 now. Sorry, 2022. I don't want to get ahead of myself. 2022. So those are my hopes and fears, that we've used this time well, and I think many of us have. We continue down a path towards sustainability, but that we aren't so late to open that we kind of miss the boat. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Keith next in terms of hopes and fears, and then we can start to answer some of the Slido questions.
Thanks, Paul. I guess just to really I'll just say 3 or 4 points on each. I guess my largest hope is that we continue to evolve Indigenous tourism marketing programs. We ran an Escape from Home campaign as ITAC in the fall of summer and early fall 2020. It was very effective. So we need to really, if we're going to continue to build in domestic tourism, we got to build more domestic awareness. We've done some research on a lot of Canadians just don't know where to find Indigenous tourism. So we have to continue to build that. That's a hope. Secondly, that we continue to develop it as a national, we see more of a national reopening plan, that we, as an industry, we all collectively stay on point towards. We think the biggest challenge we also have is continuing to see working with Indigenous tourism in every province and territory. There's a lot of variations in Indigenous tourism in the country. Third, I think a hope I have is that we want to continue to stabilize Indigenous tourism, as I spoke to, on the supply side. We're hoping the federal budget on April 19th continues to show support for investments in Indigenous tourism. And I think this is really an important piece going forward. So we'll see what the federal government does for all of us, quite frankly, in tourism on April 19th. My fears, on the flip side of that, the current federal relief programs are not very effective for Indigenous tourism, whether it's emergency wage subsidy, HAZCAP, all the various federal programs and borrowing money. We have very little uptake by Indigenous tourism businesses into those programs. And so I think that continuing to, for us, in our sector, those programs are needed for many others, but they haven't been highly effective for us. And we know that it's less than, some of those programs are less than 10% applications by Indigenous tourism businesses. That's a big problem for us. That's a fear if that's all we're going to use for relief. I think secondly, my other big fear that I would say is that in terms of how we market and rebuild tourism in the country, for especially Indigenous tourism, that we can't lose sight that Indigenous tourism is more rural, remote, northern. We have Indigenous destinations in every part of the country, and we have to find a way to help Canadians find the path to purchase, to where to find these experiences. And I hope that we can continue to work with all layers of marketing partners to address that. That's sort of, I guess, in a nutshell, my hopes and fears.
Great. Keith, thank you. We're just going to transition back here and I will introduce Marcia. Right.
Shall I go, Paul?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. So many interesting things on Slido to distract our attention. I think my hope for the future really is that we actually are the powerful contributor to Canadian quality of life that we've always aspired to be, and that we truly become seen by Canadians as the force for good in the world that we have long claimed to be. I don't think we have that social license yet, and I think we continue to have the potential to be that for the world's citizens, let alone Canada's. I think my fear for the future really is it's almost impossible right now in this climate of uncertainty to wrap our head around how much destruction we will see in the supply chain, both product and labor, and all the connective tissue that, the transportation networks and things that might take you from an airport to a particular community or experience. And those are things that are going to make recovery, I think, extremely difficult and more challenging than maybe any of us have imagined, because there are so many broken links in the chain or missing runners in the relay, if you will, that we rely on in the supply chain. And so I'm concerned that we haven't really fully grasped what that looks like yet. I think the other fear I have is that we have such a desperate need because of survival to get quantity into our doors in the short term, that may over time overtake the desire for quality, as Katie said, for long-term thrivability. So a lot of balancing is going to be needed as we come out of this, and the challenges will be immense, I think. So my hopes and fears.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcia. We'll throw it over to Katie.
Thanks, Paul. Since you're wrapping with me, I'm going to do fear first and hope last before we get into the discussion. I think there's some common themes in what we've all said around hopes and fears. For more than a year, we've seen this global famine like no other across the travel industry. I mean, Marcia had that chart that depicted so well the sharp downfall and an impacted comparison to other crises that we faced throughout our lifetimes and our careers. But now our research indicates that there's record intent for summer travel. So you think about what I said earlier about this famine turning to feast, and what I said about the travel industry not being a switch that you just turn off and on. It's a complex system. And so how can we better prepare for what is likely to be this unprecedented feast for the industry? We need it, but we have to be careful about it, which is, I think, what Marcia just said. And I think if we don't lean, which I have working closely with Paul and the team in Destination Greater Victoria and being very familiar with the strategic planning of Canada and other domestic destinations, is that we have to lean in and thoughtfully manage these tourism strategies. It's truly the shift from destination marketing to destination management. Because we can't fall into our bad habits. I think we're all in agreement that we can't be so desperate that we fall into habits that lead to things like over tourism and really the terrible parts of consumerism. That's not in the best interest of the long-term, again, prosperity of our destination. So with that hope, Canada and Australia are expected to be really the two last countries to open their borders post-pandemic to international inbound. Again, I think that there's some debate on that. I'm happy to have it. But I know there are travel suppliers and small businesses that are growing impatient, that are really truly becoming desperate, because this is life or death for many in terms of business survival. But I also think it's an opportunity to learn lessons from other economies that are opening up and making some mistakes that can be avoided in Canada. So my hope is when Canada is ready, opens up its borders to the world, that it's going to be an opportunity to step on stage and really command a global position, really as the gold standard of green practice, of, you know, and I know there's much work to be done to truly say that we feel that Canada is built on a foundation of fully regenerative travel. But if we can deliver a travel brand like that, it is going to be embraced by the world's most progressive traveling population. And that gets very much to the quality and not the quantity that really can boost and bring recovery to the country. That's my hope. And I'm absolutely here for it and here to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. I think it's going to come back to me as we transition into the next section here. So those are great insights. I think one of the benefits that Katie and her team have to share is they truly work with travel brands around the world. So with some authority, and have offices around the world. So with some authority, can make comparisons between nations and countries, destinations, and travel brands such as airlines. So you do bring a very unique skill set and expertise, which is appreciated. I think we've gone through the Slido. We're going to go into a bit of a panel discussion, but on my notes at least, I think it's getting to the time where we're going to bring the word cloud back up, and we can see how that's shaken out in terms of everyone's participation. And look at that, recovery is right at the center, which is not unexpected. But the desire for sustainable tourism practices has emerged as number 2, along with a myriad of other very real and very important issues that we're all dealing with every day, along with opportunities. But I think, you know, if we blend those top 2 together, it's a recovery through the lens of sustainable tourism practices. And that's what we're all about at Impact. We weren't about recovery until this year, but we were about sustainable tourism practices. So with that, Deidre Campbell has been moderating the Slido, and she shared with me a whole bunch of things that have been trending. And I'm gonna maybe ask, first of all, I'm gonna go to Marcia first, just to give our panelists some time to prepare. Keith second, and then Katie. Marcia, when you have a second just to think about this notion about international travelers and values aligned. So I guess that would ultimately drive towards segmentation, and that's my interpretation of the question. Is there anything that you can speak to with regards to what Destination Canada is or may continue to do about searching out those best customers that are most values aligned?
Well, Paul, you would probably remember some of the work that has been done to really understand consumers from a value perspective, the values-based traveler that we see in different segments around the world. And while I would say that we've done some work over the years to target those, this is really much more about getting high value travelers that come to our country to truly experience what our communities have to offer and are willing to stay longer and do more things. And that have an appreciation for not just the environmental sustainability values that we have, but the values that we have as a society. And so those, with the kinds of targeting mechanisms that we have available to us in marketing these days, it is getting more and more available to us to target people on the basis of those values. And so we see that as, building a following over time, using that to find others of like-minded across the globe, and maybe being somewhat less fixated in the long term on country of origin and more on a values-based approach across multiple international marketplaces.
So more of a horizontal approach then in time. I know that won't be easy, but that's been talked about for a while, but that's great to hear you continue to discuss that.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but that's an ambition.
Great. Well, thank you, Marcia. That's very, very wonderful. Because yeah, we did have Canada, the Explorers Quotient social science-based research, but now that we're into the world of data, translating that into communications might be a lot easier. So that, or less of a challenge. Keith, I'll turn it to you. You've spoken at length about the unique damage done to the supply chain and the businesses, but there's also the issue of trust and you know, not just Indigenous communities, but communities as a whole being prepared to welcome visitors back. Are you able to speak to some of the, even from a qualitative perspective, some of the perspectives that you're hearing from some of the communities that you work with?
Yeah, it's a big challenge to us. You know, I didn't lay it out in one of my fears, but the fact is we've lost 30 years of progress in 1 year due to COVID. I mean, so it's substantial. And the other side, what is also part of that equation that we've lost that I'm quite worried about is community sentiment. And I'm talking Indigenous community that have large territories. They're asserting their jurisdiction, whether they're First Nation, Métis, or Inuit, and many communities now bring international visitors back in. So we're running into this challenge of how do we market, how do we promote, how do we ensure that there's community social license to support regrowing Indigenous tourism. You know, Canada has gone through this I guess evolution of where Indigenous communities have been skeptical of tourism. It started in the 80s and 90s, and it took us a lot of years and decades to actually build community trust. And how are we marketing? How are we promoting authentic Indigenous experiences? You know, nations don't just hand that over easily, and ITAC is in a very tricky spot to maintain positive social license around that. And now, if we think we're just going to turn a switch and the communities are going to just do an about face, it's a big challenge. It's one of our other big fears. And so we can overcome it, but we need a real logical strategy and plan. And ITAC feels we've got that. But it's going to take some significant investments and support and a lot to continue building that social license. But if we don't do this right, instead of recovery in 3 to 5 years, we're talking probably, I predict 10 to 20 years to get back to 2019 levels, which will be a huge negative impact to the tourism sector and how we market and promote Canada as an Indigenous destination.
Perfect, Keith. That's great. You did a really good job. Your audio was in and out a little bit, but we got your message and it was fantastic. So thank you very much for that response. I'm going to throw it now to Katie. MMGY in some of its presentations talked about trust being the new currency in travel. Are you able to kind of unpack that a little bit and share what you're seeing in terms of maybe some other best practices or ideas from around the world?
Sure. When you think about trust, you think about, I tend to go to brand, right? Your brand platform, and that feels awfully fluffy to people, especially when we're talking about real business impacts, real life impacts. So it's a strange transition maybe coming off of what Keith just shared. But we know that brand matters, and the perception of brand and the trust in a brand matters. In fact, I pulled up a stat because I thought this might be the direction you're going, is that 64% of people actually prioritize purchase based on perception of brand. And that's everyone. That's not just travelers who we talk to. That actually comes from consumer tech. But the brand platform has to represent different things now in a post-pandemic world. So we talk about the fact that, you know, you talk about pricing strategy and packaging and things like that usually drive traveler behaviors. But now it really is about safety and communicating safety in a destination, a sense of purpose around social issues, inclusivity, driving equity, and sustainability. These become the factors that people are starting to align with brands. And so when they can align, when we always say where you go, where you travel, the destinations you go to say a lot about who you are, just like the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive. It's not incredibly different, but we have to align values in a different way to establish that trust. And then what has continued to be shared across this group is that when we can align with values, that means the travelers coming into our communities are people that we can engage with thoughtfully and appreciate in a different way than what is this sort of perception of what a tourist looks like, which is not to Marcia's point, leaving a place better than when you came. Like that's the traveler that we want. So that's what trust means to me, is actually values alignment on a much deeper level than many travel brands have ever been required to before.
Great. Okay, thanks, Katie. As always, we're getting some great questions on Slido, and I'm doing my best to keep up, and I'm getting some great support here. I'm going to go back to you with one question in a minute, but for the sake of the panelists, I'm going to share what the top 4 or 5 that I've been briefed on here are, so you have a couple minutes to prepare some responses or thoughts, because this is certainly going to be very stimulating for all of us. There's a lot of questions around metrics in regenerative travel. I know a lot of us are being charged with looking into that and don't have the answers yet, but there's some good academic work about that. Unpacking the idea of stewardship, that's kind of a bit beyond destination management. Low impact travelers, is there a segment there that we could be interested in? Defining social license. And then, so if we could all think about those themes, I'll throw one more back to you, Katie, which would be really great in terms of the, kind of your global perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Is there kind of an understanding of, when we define sustainable travel or sustainable travelers, is there a values base that comes through in kind of research or segmentation? Is there kind of a common understanding of what a sustainably oriented traveler looks like, or does that vary from source market to source market?
Well, I think what I was hoping to share in the data at the top of the call was this idea that what the perception of sustainability is to individuals is quite different on the spectrum.
Right.
And we talked repeatedly about the fact that the sustainability discussion can be so polarizing. Like if you're only doing this, you're not doing enough. And again, while we have our own beliefs about how much is enough and what it's going to take to really reverse some of the impacts pre and during the pandemic, the reality is that to connect with travelers, with the right type of travelers, we have to meet them where they are. And so being able to connect with them, if it is about single-use plastics, okay. If it is about carbon offsets, if it is about more sort of aggressive forms of and productive forms of sustainability, okay. How do we meet people where they're at? You actually asked me in the last question, like, is there an example of maybe who's doing a great job? And I always love tying some of that context. So the state of Colorado in the US, who we do business with, is actually rolling out, and some of you might have heard of this Do Right Colorado campaign. It really is born out of recovery, post-pandemic recovery, about the safety and communicating what's open, what type of experience you'll have in the state if you're coming through this latter part of the pandemic. But it's also a platform, or a springboard rather, in talking about low impact travel opportunities. And it's about building an inventory of low impact travel opportunities. And that really, to me, creates, when you think about the word inventory, you think about accommodations, you think about different sectors of the industry. But when we talk about low impact inventory, we're talking about a variety of opportunities for people to connect into more sustainable practices. So one of those is electrifying the byways of Colorado. So the road trip is obviously incredibly popular. And so electrifying those and making it possible to actually stop and plug in your electric automobile to continue your journey is not something that's been a reality before, but this is now a commitment being made by the state of Colorado. Seems quite simple, but again, it's really flipping the conversation about what a road trip can be. And that creates accessibility on this topic, which I think is critical to forward movement.
Well, great, Katie, absolutely. We've been diving into sustainability here in Victoria for 5 or 6 years in a big way, but it's the capital projects that are often the biggest challenge, right? So, we need that holistic look needs to happen. So the comment or the question that's got the most support on Slido is how do we rebuild with the support of locals? I'm just kind of focused on that. And then stewardship is coming up a lot. So maybe Keith will go to you next to see what you might want to offer in terms of comments on both of those. And then I'll ask Marcia if she has some comments on that theme as well.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. I think I do have a lot of thoughts on this. We did a fair amount of consumer research in the fall with Insignia Marketing. And what I would say on the short term, at least, what we need is, let me talk a bit about the challenges. There's really, in terms of what we saw when the consumer research within Canadians is that you know, typically a lot of Indigenous tourism was believed to be an older sort of, more financially in a retirement setting, 45 plus customer. What we did see is that there was tremendous interest across many different groups in those authentic experiences. The challenge, an undefined, and there's a lack of visibility, and the industry has to come to terms with that. You know, non-Indigenous consumers through our market groups showed us, or, you know, spoke to this, that they're really confused where to find authentic experiences, what's the brand, where do they need to look. So they're this process to purchasing, right? Very little word of mouth, low online emergence and searches, not integrated. There's a lot of skepticism around the authenticity. And the fact is, ITAX advertising is not enough. So we saw that. So in terms of where we need to go next, there's some short-term things that we believe need to happen. First of all, we need to be aggressive. We need to engage and encourage in a combination of sort of just tactics, drive traffic, you know, right from whether it's there in Victoria where you are, or at the provincial marketing or territorial marketing levels, or if Destination Canada, we need to invest, of course, in things like digital assets. There's just not enough curated content online. And bottom line is we need to bring destination marketing organizations and provincial marketing organizations more on side. It's really, the consumers, the research we did showed that there just needs to be more opportunities to cross promote. So, you know, obviously there coming out of that will be some long-term recommendations, but the fact is we know the consumer is interested. We're hearing it from Katie. Not only we know in Canada there is, we hear it from DC, we hear it from Katie and the research they're doing in the US. But the fact is we do need to address the marketing challenges on the short term to help us really rebuild and stabilize. The best recovery plan for Indigenous tourism will be bringing customers to the front doors of all the businesses we can, as with all the sectors. But those are some of the things. I just want to just I know I'm taking a bit of time here. The other side of this issue is that, you know, the fact is, like, people in Canada and the world is going to be critical to that. We know that there's been an attitudinal shift towards connecting with land and spirituality, particularly Indigenous values. So we just need to find a way to bring these sort of, I think there could be a lot of opportunity through this, but we have to shape it. And that starts with how we market and promote that as well.
Yeah, no, you're right, Keith. I've seen so much talk about, you know, kind of spirituality or rediscovering, or people going on their own journeys, but it needs to be done right in alignment with the communities that you serve and we all serve. Marsha, do you have any comments on this idea about trust and building back with the trust of our communities?
Yeah, and I wanted to just touch on sort of building on what both Keith and Katie were saying. You know, when we think about social license, that really comes back fundamentally to making sure that our industry is giving more than it's taking from communities. And, you know, when we're considering, you know, sort of the broad spectrum of issues and opportunities that the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN create for us to think about sustainability, it goes so much beyond sort of the environmental aspect. And I think we don't spend enough time talking about the sociocultural aspect of sustainability. And that's where I think communities really care about who's coming into their homes. You know, there's certainly the economic and there's the environmental, you know, certainly do no harm notion, but how do we get better at really understanding the sociocultural sustainability of what we're doing? You know, how are our visitors connecting with the true culture of individual communities? Are they participating in, you know, helping with the labor component of communities? Do they embrace the arts of communities? Is there, you know, an aspect of learning around Indigenous community? You know, these are all aspects of a different type of sustainability that I think the pandemic has brought to the fore more than, you know, maybe more than anything else as part of sustainability. So quickly, just on the support of locals and that social license, I think that's where it resides. But I also think that in a very sort of tactical, practical way. Getting the support of locals and building confidence in travelers, it really starts with peer-to-peer sharing. You know, those that venture forth first and are sharing their good experiences and their feeling that they are well cared for and health and hygiene protocols are super, will build confidence. And the best source of that confidence comes from people, you know, friends, family, and colleagues. So, you know, we've got to get really busy in the P2P social space as we emerge from this.
Great, thank you, Marcia. We've got some initiatives planned in Victoria, but I'm not quite ready to announce them yet. But it's good to see that everyone's turned their mind to this. We've received one very interesting new question that I'll ask everyone to comment on, and then I'm going to circle back to metrics at the very end, because we can't. We've got about 15-16 minutes left, and I'm going to give a shout out to someone very special at the end around the idea of metrics. But you know, questions come in that Deidre has flagged for me. Is a very interesting one. The idea that if we focus on longer lengths of stay within communities, or travelers maybe coming to Canada from an international source market or the United States or domestically, but focusing on length of stay, you know, their carbon intensity could be a bit less because they're, you know, they're maybe moving around within the community, but they're not, you know, flying back as many times. They could spend some time really connecting and getting to know the communities. They could travel between several communities, but at the same time, we know that people are also very time starved as well too. But if any one of you want to take on this idea of kind of maybe a bit more of a slower tourism movement, or focusing on length of stay, anything that's come across your desks would be very interesting. So I'm going to ask if any one of the three panelists have any comments on that. I've got you all on your toes here.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to jump in, but please interrupt. Some of the statistics that I shared at the top, and I know I threw quite a bit at everybody at the beginning, is this idea that this is about quality. I mean, we can't underscore that enough. People feel differently about taking vacation than they did prior to 2020 because of the fact that we've had to endure this hardship of being at home and being stuck at home and not having the ability to travel. So I said earlier, 81% of people are placing more importance on taking more vacation days in 2021. We can see that, you know, I certainly think it's going to be interesting to see what travel behavior and consumer sentiment looks like as, you know, there's more time put in between this pandemic and the future. Will people fall back into bad habits? Will they stop taking vacation days? I don't know. But what I can tell you right now is that people are eager to travel. And those that are more interested in spending money and time in places that have sustainable and environmentally responsible practices are spending more, and they're staying, 31% are staying 3 days longer in a destination. So Deirdre is absolutely right. The idea is that we want people, for example, Paul in Greater Victoria, we don't want them thinking about Victoria as a day trip. It's not a day trip. How do we expose them to the broader destination, the experience, and have them stay a few days, spend more money in destination, and not take 3 flights to explore? That's important, and that is a huge opportunity.
Great, thank you, Katie. Do any of the other panelists want to weigh on this topic before we dive into the very exciting, for me anyways, topic of metrics?
Yeah, Paul, I'd like to just say our research showed that too. Like, you know, with Insignia, we found through our consumer, we did 6 focal groups. Anyways, the fact was attitudes have completely shifted in the consumer research we did. They wanted to embrace a slower, more mindful pace of life with loved ones. And through that, they wanted to appreciate nature, simplicity, spirituality, and soulfulness. And so this is, when you think of those characteristics, it's exactly what Katie just said. It's exactly, so it isn't the day trip. It is, you know, drive traffic locally. It's how do we get them to go to destination and stay and spend a bit more time. And then we just got to make sure as an industry, we have the right, you know, the right packaging and the right assets around that. And how do we help people stay longer in where it makes sense? So I think the attitudes have shifted to slow down. The question is, will we shift to give them that kind of experience? And that's going to be, whether it's ITAC or DC or yourselves in Victoria or anywhere else, do we have the right kind of packaging and marketing messages to embrace that change that the world is wanting to see. And that's going to be our collective challenge.
Great, thanks, Keith. Marcia, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on this topic or not. Don't feel obligated to. Otherwise, we'll pivot into metrics. I think I'm going to take that as a no. Okay, so our final question as we wrap up, and I hope this has been helpful and a little bit inspirational to our delegate attendees, is metrics. You know, it doesn't really matter until you start measuring it. And I want to give a shout out to Celeste Devar of Earth Rhythms, who sat on the old CTC, Canadian Tourism Commission Product Innovation Enhancement Committee with me when I was a manager there, along with Marion and many others, 15 years ago now, I guess, who certainly keeps us honest, pushes boundaries in terms of making sure that we're staying true to values and are actually on a journey. And he shared with me last fall an article about a framework around the metrics of the circular economy. And it wasn't like a super detailed article, but it was a conceptual framework, and it was very helpful to me. So as we move into giving more than we take, and as Marcia rightly said, more than just the environmental elements of the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And I want to give a shout out to Destinations International right now, because we're very focused at that organization on diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion. We will not answer and solve this in the next 10 minutes, but what do we see as the next steps in terms of defining performance metrics, KPIs, to really dig into these topics so that we're actually held accountable and it's not just lip service. So I'm going to throw that out there. I'm hoping that maybe Katie and Marcia will respond, and Keith as well.
I think, Paul, that you're really on to what is the heart of the issue. You know, there's no shortage of good intentions in our industry, but I think there has been a shortage of holding ourselves to account.
Right.
And this is the time, I think, to really put our stake in the ground and say, you know, moving forward, we are going to measure how we are actually contributing to this quality of life in Canada and to the SDGs more generally across the planet. And that's really going to take us into being able to harmonize, you know, a view of the many variables that have to be balanced as part of that scorecard, if you will. So it's more than just looking at the economic impacts or the number of visitors or the environmental CO2 emissions, you know, trying to get at things like sociocultural impacts is much more difficult. And we're very fortunate in that we have access and a partnership through an MOU with Statistics Canada, which has access to a great resource of data that looks at all manner of, you know, Canadian society and has access through partnerships to more and more. And in our work with them, we're trying to define how would we measure this going forward. So I wish I could just say ABC, this is what we're doing, but it's going to take us a year to really get underneath that and have the power of this partnership with Stats Canada to do it, to really get under it. And I recall the speaker that you had, Dr. Woods, from last year's session with TIBC that was held in Victoria, just talking about the difficulty of measuring net benefits and how complex it is. And so there's lots of academic work that we can point to, and certainly as the UN's SDGs become more embraced by more nations, we'll see good examples emerge, I think. But nothing definitive I can share today.
No, but I think we're all on that journey, and I think that's the positive news. And that's been one of the reasons Impact was created, was to translate some of those ideas into practice, and in our case, on the street practice. Katie, are you seeing anything from your research or some of the other clients that you're working with and kind of translating out? We've talked about Colorado, but maybe some other examples that inspire you around this idea of metrics.
Well, I think Marcia covered it quite perfectly. I'm not sure that I have much to add other than it is absolutely a work in progress. And how can we, the biggest challenge in what is particularly in the US, a very capitalist driven society, is how do you make these more qualitative measures about the impact, quality of life, the equity, like how do you demonstrate the impact of that broadly and put it on equal standing with more traditional business metrics?
Exactly.
Or are we pushing ourselves too hard to create equity in how those are measured, as opposed to talking about them for what they are separately? But I agree that agreeing on what those measures are varies so much on a destination, on a travel brand. But we are working on those. In fact, I'm writing a contract right now with a client where we have DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging metrics in our contract in terms of what we have to achieve from a marketing standpoint. I guess an analogy that I would draw to as a marketer is that everybody remembers the days of old in advertising where you would have last click attribution. You're like, oh, that's when they made the decision to buy. That's when they made the decision to come to our destination and to go ahead and book. And we all know that over time we saw it was these various touch points and opportunities that created the relationship that spurred the decision to purchase. And so we started calling this multi-click, multifaceted attribution, where we started weighting things so that we can make recommendations on where to spend money in order to yield the greatest return on activity. And I have to, while what we're talking about is so much more complex than marketing, even I can admit that, we are talking about a multitude of touch points that create experiences. And we're talking about creating a quality of life born out of the economic opportunity that tourism presents. And that to me is what we're going to have to get to, is a model of KPIs that enable us as leaders, both elected and appointed and hired by companies, to make decisions that are sound and in the best interests of our collective future.
Great. Well, I thought that added something to the conversation. Katie, thank you very much. Keith, do you want to add anything to this conversation? And if you're not keen to, that's okay as well too, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I do actually. I think I would say that, we live by the saying in our industry with Indigenous tourism that it's not about us without us. And, this industry does a lot around measuring results, but they sure don't at times include Indigenous perspective in that. And I just would challenge everyone that when we talk about sustainability, we talk about measuring Canada, and let's not forget, let's measure the impacts to Indigenous communities. Let's not forget Indigenous businesses. Let's not forget, and unless you have that subset in your measurements, it's incomplete. And I research is paramount to our future, no different than it is for any business or any operator in this industry. And often if it isn't ITAC or one of our Indigenous partners doing it, it's not done. And I think we failed in that regard as an industry. We continue to have to be bold and brave to stand up to say, look, we need to include that. It doesn't mean we're wrong to what's happened, but we have to address it going forward. And so I would say to everyone, if cultural sustainability, and we talk about Canada having this vibrant culture, then let's make sure we include all Canadian cultures in that perspective. So I would just say it's something we need to correct into the future, and we need to, ITAC will continue to push all of us in a way that hopefully gets us to that place.
Oh, that's awesome, Keith. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so true. And it's such a tricky point that we're living in. We have companies going to their bankers for more capital to get them through the next year, and they still have to have those traditional metrics about revenue and occupancy and things like that, but we need to start blending in all these other new metrics at the same time. So it's going to be a very interesting and important journey we all go through in the next few years. I do see we are running up against the clock. We are getting close to 10 o'clock, and I did commit to keep everyone on time. I want to do a few wrap-ups and thank yous. And first of all, I want to share, we will be sharing the recording. We will be capturing some of the best questions. We will be following up as we always do. We don't have the capacity this year to do a full conference proceedings paper. All of us are operating on less capacity than we were in the past, but we will keep the constant communication timely and relevant through the rest of the year. We hope that everyone's enjoyed our time together this morning. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Marcia and her team for all the prep work that they've done, Katie and the team at MMGY, and Keith at the team at ITAC. I also want to give another shout out to our sponsors, Tourism Vancouver Island, Fortis BC, MMGY Global. Thank you all to our participants for coming and engaging in Slido. I was not able to keep up fully, but I was able to get some support. And we look forward to seeing you in Victoria, 23rd to 26th of 2022. We'll all have some vaccinations by then, you know, and brighter and better days are ahead, and hopefully more sustainable and regenerative ones as well. Thank you, everyone, and thanks so much again to our panelists.